For nearly 3 decades, the United Nations has been bringing together almost every country on Earth for global climate summits. In that time, climate change has gone from being a fringe issue to a global priority. The ongoing 26th annual summit is playing host to world leaders, thousands of negotiators, government representatives, businesses, and citizens to reach an agreement on how to pull the world back from the brink of disaster. U.S. President Joe Biden said that we only have a brief window before us to reduce the emissions from burning oil, gas, and coal that pose an existential threat to humanity. But days before this statement, Biden also urged the world's largest oil producers to pump more of those fuels. He later emphasized that it was just not rational to expect the world to move to renewable energy overnight. While his words drew fire from energy experts and climate activists who say the world cannot afford to ramp up oil and natural gas production if it wants to avert catastrophic levels of warming, the president's comments highlight the political and economic realities facing politicians as they grapple with climate change. And they underscore the complexity of moving away from fossil fuels that have underpinned global economic activity since the industrial age. Africa is the lowest carbon dioxide emitter, but is the most affected. And many nations on the continent rely on fossil fuels to generate energy and revenue. African nations have pledged net carbon zero emissions by 2060. Is this realistic? How will this affect the continent's development? Is the world ready to live without fossil fuels? Let's talk the new global energy mix and what it means for Africa. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me is Balogun Olojede. He's the Executive Director of DMA Advisory and Management Services Limited. Balogun, welcome back to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me. Oh, fantastic. Please check your mic. I think you are muted. I didn't make out what you were saying, but I definitely know you're talking to me.
Oh, thank you for that. I was muted.
All right, great to have you. So let's start with this. Just an energy mix basically refers to the range of energy sources that are available, both renewable and non-renewable, that are being in use. So as it stands now, the global primary energy source is about 80% fossil fuels, with oil and coal accounting for more than 50% of that. Renewables account for just around 4%, including wind, thermal, and solar. The data tells us that Europe used less oil than the global percentage and more nuclear and renewable resources. North America had the highest consumption per resident, and Russia is second, with Europe and the Middle East coming behind. While North America used 240 gigajoules per capita, Africa used only 15 gigajoules per capita. As we see these conversations happening with COP26 and a move to push the world to a cleaner, renewable, more sustainable energy sources, do you think Africa's concerns are being represented in these conversations being had?
I'm not even sure that Africa is particularly interested or ready in any way for anything that has to do with moving away from fossil fuel. We are not on the map when it comes to consumption of fossil fuel. How much fossil fuel does Africa as a whole consume relative to other parts of the world? But having said that, there are certain policy decisions that could be made at those international platforms. And for that reason, Africa must be present and voice its own concern and the way forward. Africa cannot afford to stand alone. But as far as the key decisions to be made are concerned, Africa is a small consumer, but Africa is a large dependent on the money from fossil fuel. A very good example is our own Nigeria. There are a few others also in Africa who depend on the consumers of those fuel. Not that we don't consume that much, but we depend on those consumers to remain alive.
So let's look at where our population is plus where the world wants us to go. So 1 in 2 people added to the world population up to 2040 will be African. And the continent will become the world's most populous region by 2023, overtaking China and India. Rapid economic and population growth, particularly with the cities that are growing, will have profound implications for the energy sector, both regionally and globally. So in May of this year, we had the International Energy Agency releasing a roadmap for the global energy sector. And they said that the plan was to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, requiring a swift and immediate shift from petroleum energy sources to energy provided through renewables. Now, you've said that you don't even believe that Africa is ready for this conversation. The conversation is happening with us or without us. We're suffering the bigger end of the climate change activities. But in terms of this being realistic to where Africa's needs are right now, what's the feasibility of us helping the world to meet that net zero carbon deadline?
Well, let me also say again, I don't think that helping the world to meet that zero emission target rests on the shoulders of Africa. We are not a big contributor to the consumption of those fossil fuels that is causing all the problem that we're talking about. However, like I said, because this conversation will not be complete without Africa, especially in view of one very important information that you have made just now about how the energy need of Africa will grow dramatically over the next few decades. And also because there are a number of African countries that are dependent on the fossil fuel from an income perspective. Example is Nigeria, Angola, Algeria, and some other countries that are out there. The real change that will happen would need to happen with those people at that place, at that conference, who are prevaricating. So you saw a Biden on one side who would say, oh, pump fuel, let all the OPEC people, let them pump some oil, because there are price issues if those oil is not pumped. On the other side, he also wants a situation in which we pursue this zero net targets. These are contradictory positions for anybody to have. And you can see the dilemma, because even the Capitol Hill, which is where the law is made in America, is today still powered by coal. So it's a balancing act, and the world as a global place must work out that transition properly. If the transition is not properly worked out, there will be major challenges, not just for the big nations, for the developed nations who are the big consumers, but also for Africa, where we do some of the production and where our economy is very dependent. There was a recent speech, I think it was by the vice president, where he was talking about how the West must not defund gas, because all these fossil fuel things. So people are already talking about defunding petroleum exploration, defunding gas exploration, and all of that. If they defund it, what happens to a country like Nigeria? That is why this talk we need to refocus this properly and not just generalize. We're not on the same pedestal when it comes to this renewable energy.
Okay, so let's talk about that. There are many who believe that this conversation, especially as it pertains to Africa, is not being held in ways that are inclusive, equitable, or even just for the continent and the needs we have. These Western countries, they use the Industrial Revolution, they use coal, they use the gas then to develop their economies. And at a time when they are now rich and they're now high-income countries, and we want to do the same, that's when this conversation is now coming up that no, it's time now that the world jumps and the world moves forward to other energy. But let me paint a picture here. I would like to hear what the implications are. So a recent International Energy Agency report found that countries should immediately stop new oil, gas, and coal development if the world hopes to keep the average global temperature from increasing 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So let's say there is an agreement made. Let's say African countries sign up and agree to no further exploration, no further development of their natural resources in the fossil fuel categories. Paint a picture for us. What would be the economic implications of this for African economies? Economies like Nigeria, like Angola, like Mauritius, like Tanzania that have these rich fossil fuel deposits. What are we looking at?
The economies of those countries are going to literally collapse. They will pack up. So you take a country like Nigeria, where like 50% of the government revenue is from oil, maybe up to like 80% or more of its foreign exchange earnings is from this fossil fuel. And you defund it and we take it into extinction. What will happen will be calamitous for this country. So we must be able to have a discussion around a proper transitioning. It's an energy mix transitioning that will consider every party, every stakeholders in the mix, and not merely a focus on the West, who have used, like you said, the oil, fossil fuel to develop themselves, and now they think it is high time to pull the rug off the rest of our feet. It is not the proper way to do this.
So we also saw OPEC, the Organization for Petroleum Exporting Countries, respond to that release. And they said that for many developing countries, the pathway to net zero without international assistance is clear. So this is a twofold question. One, if we were saying that this is the path the world has decided and Africa has joined this bandwagon, what type of assistance would Africa need to basically sort of leapfrog the fossil fuels into more of the renewable energy conversation for our energy mix? And two, do you really think the world will give Africa that assistance?
I'm not so confident that the world will give us that attention, because the world itself, from America to China and the rest of the world, are still trying to sort themselves out as far as transiting from fossil fuel into the other energy mix, the renewables especially. So it's like talking about COVID. When you need to solve the COVID problem of your country, you solve it first before you even think of the other people. However, what the rest of the world can do for Africa is to help us. If we set a target, like we're rolling out target 2050, 2060 now, within that target, we can have a period that will help Africa get more of its own gas and oil and gas assets from under the ground onto the surface and converted into assets that we endure. While we achieve that, it is now possible for us to start talking of transiting away from fossil fuel into renewables. Not before. What we're having right now is having that discussion as if Africa can stop today and just start to do renewables. No, that is not going to work. Help us to make the best of what we currently have in terms of oil and gas assets. Then after a period, we transit into renewables along with the rest.
All right, I'll pick up that thread because there are some recommendations as to how this could be easier for Africa. Some have said, in fact, the continent should be compensated for keeping its fossil fuels in the ground. And then we'll see if we can find a middle ground to this conversation as well. There is a conversation happening right now at COP26 with the new global energy mix being pushed. The world is worried that we are at the edge of the precipice when it comes to the issue of climate change. But with decisions needing to be made, how will they impact the continent's development and economy? We'll continue the conversation right after this. Still with me is Balogun Olojede, the Executive Director, DMA Advisory and Management Services. Now, some statistics. 2 in every 3 Africans rely on subsistence farming for food and basic livelihoods, while nearly half, about 600 million people, still do not have access to electricity. With an average GDP per capita of $2,000 compared to the global average of $10,500 and a population set to rise to over 4 billion in just 80 years, Africa's economy needs to be 16 times bigger than it is today to elevate the quality of life of its citizens to match the global average. But at the same time, climate shocks threaten to derail Africa's development gains. Now, research estimates that adapting to climate change could cost the continent $50 billion annually by 2050. Furthermore, losses to GDP could be in excess of 20% in extreme temperature scenarios. So while we ask the West to take our needs into consideration, Balogun, I'll ask you, are we seeing African countries sort of step up to the plate? The science is real, it cannot be denied. Africa is bearing the brunt of the climate change, but the needs for our development and our economies are also there. Can we find a middle ground?
That is exactly what we need to do. It's a balancing act. And that is not just Nigeria playing around this balancing act. We have seen, I made an example of Biden just over the last few weeks. He had said two separate statements that were on two different divides. On one side, you want oil to be pumped by countries. On the other side, you want to transit to a net zero situation. Those are contradictory. So it's a balancing act. There's a huge oil and gas implication even for the U.S. at this moment. U.S., by the way, is the biggest producer in the entire world, with probably over 12 million barrels a day. And if you imagine the implication of that for the economy of the U.S., so the question is the same whether it's in Nigeria or it's in the U.S. If you take that 12 million barrels today from the United States, what will be the implication on the economy? It will be a disaster. In Africa, while we think, okay, the rest of the world should come to our aid in terms of helping to transit, at the same time, there are several basic things that we can begin to do on our own, even without the West. Look at the tree planting project that we have mentioned in this country. I think there was a plan to plant 1 million trees.
The Great Green Wall.
In Nigeria. We made that project. Who is championing it? Has it been done? And then there are several other issues that we need to deal with. You have the boiling of crude that is going on in the Niger Delta every day uncontrollably. You have spillages all over the whole place by virtue of poor environmental consciousness and poor regulation of what is going on in that part of Nigeria. All those things on our own, we can begin to deal with it. We had a situation in which we have formulated a policy to stop gas flaring for several years. As we speak today, a lot of this gas are still being flared. Go to the Niger Delta, you will see all of that going on. Can we begin from all of that? Can we deal with all those issues? And other issues that are
Hello, Balogun. Okay, unfortunately, I think he is frozen there. We'll see if the connection will resume, and of course, we'll be able to get back with him. I'm not sure if Balogun is back with me now. Hello, Balogun. Hello, Balogun.
Hello, I'm here.
All right, fantastic. All right, please go ahead, wrap up your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I guess I was talking about all those other things that are within our own power to do without hurting the economy. As a matter of fact, it's a plus for the economy. You had also mentioned something about how the West can, reward us for keeping our oil under the ground.
Okay, so let me explain that before you answer it now. So there are a number of recommendations that have been flying around, and one of them says that Africa should be compensated for keeping the fossil fuels in the ground. We see that many of the countries on the continent are yet to fully monetize their hydrocarbon resources. And so people are saying that rather than having the West sort of moralize on this issue and take finance off the table from oil and gas development deals, rather, rich countries should seek to partner with African countries by offering financial and other incentives to keep their natural deposits in the ground. What do you think of that?
A very popular initiative in that direction was the carbon credit issue. The carbon credit issue was not particularly successful with Africa. Yeah. How many credits have we been rewarded with? How much have we made from carbon credit in the real sense? Apart from that, it is a difficult thing to leave your finances in the hands of foreigners, because essentially what we're saying is that for Nigeria, that about 50% of our income comes from oil. We now need to wait on the West to give us that 50% of our income that comes from oil. It's more or less like a backdoor colonialization. So we have to be careful about handing over our survival to other people to pay us for our oil. Rather, we should be able to reach an agreement that allows us to benefit from our oil assets over a transitional period. And then everybody can start talking of, oh, renewable, but not the way the discussion is currently.
So then who should spearhead this? Because we have many African leaders currently at COP26 now. We've heard from President Muhammadu Buhari as well, who has promised that Nigeria will work towards a net zero deadline as well, a separate deadline as it may be. But how will this be, why are you laughing? How will this be spearheaded? How will this be brought together? Because this has to be a conversation. It cannot be one African country going to have this conversation with the West. It has to be a continental conversation where we lay down our points, we lay down our recommendations and the suggested ways forward, and we come together and negotiate, as you said, a equitable, just and fair transition for the continent in regards to this.
I perfectly agree with you. Africa must come together as a continent to present its case to the international community on this energy matter. You see, what we saw at the ongoing event at Glasgow are African nations making promises that they have no intention of keeping, in the real sense of it. I can almost bet that there are no numbers behind, there are no numbers or detailed planning behind the year that was being mentioned. And that is not how these things are supposed to be. So you say 250, okay, 2050, okay, let's make our own 2060, 10 years after that, and then you go out there and you say it. What exactly are the things that are behind that 2060? How did we arrive at 2060? I don't think there is anything. So we need to go back on the drawing board, see how we can cooperatively present a case to the world to see that, look, this is what we want as Africa. If we don't do that, we may actually be creating a problem that will not be long before it starts to crystallize on us.
Okay, well, we have to end the conversation here, but I feel we're just scratching the surface. There's more to come from COP26. There's more conversations to be had. And at the end of the day, right now, we have more questions than answers and more questions than a way forward. So we look to see how African leaders will come out of COP26, hopefully united and hopefully with a purposeful direction for the continent. Balogun Olajede, thank you so much for joining me.
The pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me.
All right. It's a conversation that continues because ultimately Africa must achieve net zero, but not at the expense of its development. The African Energy Chamber's 2021 Africa Energy Outlook Report projects that African gas production and consumption will rise in the 2020s. As a result, Africa's natural gas sector will be responsible for large-scale job creation, increased opportunities for monetization and economic diversification, and critical gas-to-power initiatives that will bring more Africans reliable electricity. These significant benefits should not be dismissed in the name of achieving net zero emissions on deadline. To tell African countries with gas potential like Mozambique, Tanzania, Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria, Senegal, and others not to make use of their natural resources and rather wait for foreign aid and handouts from the West doesn't make any sense. Africa deserves the chance to capitalize on its own oil and gas to strengthen itself. And that is the last word on this. What is up next is NC4 to watch. Do stay with us. And as if we are on the mark, South Africa kicks us off for NC4 to watch, talking about Eskom and coal. And here it is. South Africa's coal-dependent power utility, Eskom, says it will rely on government and development finance for the important funding for a transition to cleaner sources of energy. The concessional lending will allow the company, which provides almost all of South Africa's power, to accelerate a move away from the fossil fuel. A survey has shown Kenya's private sector activity grew faster in October, partly helped by the government easing some COVID-19 restrictions. The Market Stanbic Bank Kenya Purchasing Managing Index peaked at 51.4 in October from 50.4 a month earlier. Morocco's unemployment rates fell to 11.8% in the quarter through September from 12.7% in the same period last year. The latest unemployment figures come as the North African economy is slowly recovering from the pandemic. The unemployment rate is higher among the youth at 31%, graduates with 18.7%, and women at 16.5%. And finally, deposit money banks in Nigeria have issued a deadline of December 31st, 2021 for the acceptance of old 20 and 50-pound notes to enable proper conclusion of cash evacuation. A circular to this effect has been communicated to the banks from Nigeria's #1 lender and regulatory agency, the Central Bank of Nigeria. And that's Business Edge for today. You can follow us on our social media platforms at News Central TV, and of course, download our mobile app. We are now live on the LimeX platform, and that means that if you are an African in the diaspora, in Russia particularly, you can also watch News Central live there. So if you know Africans outside of the continent who are based in Russia, let them know that they have a station that brings them all the latest African news right at their fingertips. I'm Tolulope, Adeleru Balogun. Have a fantastic day.